Hello, Dr. Joe here of the AskDrJoe.org and the 2020 From.com. So here is something you wished you knew before you became diabetic. Because becoming diabetic is a process, and I want to run you through that process in this very video. It's about joining all the dots that actually leads to type 2 diabetes. That's what this video is about. You're going to learn about what happens in the muscle, what happens in the liver, and how that leads to pre-diabetes and diabetes ultimately. Because if you understand all of these things, if you understand the physiology which leads to the pathology, then of course you can manage your condition a lot better. Okay, if we're talking about reversal, then you know what to do when it comes to reversing type 2 diabetes. So let's join the dots. Okay, so let's walk you through the journey of how diabetes actually begins. And by that I mean type 2 diabetes, okay, not type 1. So this is how type 2 diabetes begins in practically all type 2 diabetics. So let's begin the journey. Step 1. Step 1 begins with what you eat and what you do. Okay, so basically, step 1 is all about your lifestyle. So you're eating high fat foods, refined carbs, and being physically inactive. This kind of lifestyle is a recipe for diabetes. So let's move on to step 2. Now, because of that lifestyle, which is not healthy at the very least, what happens next is you have a fat buildup and fat storage. So step 2 has to do with fat buildup and storage from this unhealthy lifestyle that we talked about earlier. And the next thing we need to do now is have a look at what happens in this very step 2. And this is about what happens in the muscle, because what happens in the muscle precedes what happens in the liver, but it's essentially the same process. So what you're looking at here now is a group of muscle fibers, say from the thigh, yeah, okay, from the thigh. So this is what we call skeletal muscle. Now, this is skeletal muscle without any fat, so it is clean. This is what a normal muscle should look like. However, when you have this fat buildup and fat storage, what then happens is all the fat gets stored in the muscle. So this is a muscle that is filled with fat. All of that yellow stuff you're seeing there, that is fat. So once you have that fat buildup and storage in the muscle will begin to reject the glucose in the circulation. So you have what we call reduced glucose uptake. Okay. The muscle will say, no, I don't want the glucose at all because I am stuffed with fat. And because I'm stuffed with fat, I don't want the glucose. And because it's not receiving the glucose, that will lead to a reduction in glycogen synthesis. Glycogen is the storage form of the glucose. So essentially, the muscle is not taking in the glucose, so it's got nothing to make the glycogen from. So you have reduced glucose uptake from the blood circulation, and you also have reduced glycogen synthesis within the muscle. And that, by definition, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call skeletal muscle insulin resistance. So the skeletal muscle is now resistant to the glucose in circulation. It doesn't obey instructions from the insulin because the insulin is the key that opens the door for the glucose to get in. So that is insulin resistance by the skeletal muscle. And when that happens, that concludes steps 1 and 2. Okay, let's move on to step 3. And in step 3, we have what we call the liver attack. So as you can see here, this is a very nice clean liver. Now, what happens is that because the muscles have rejected the glucose on account of the fact that they're filled with fat, when nature says, well, I have to, divert the glucose somewhere, the glucose has to go somewhere. It's all circulating in the blood. So it diverts the glucose in circulation to the liver. So the liver is now overwhelmed with all of that glucose that has just been diverted from the muscles. And of course, as at this point in time, the liver is still clean. So what happens next? This is step 3B, I should say. So because the liver is now overwhelmed with all of that glucose that is rejected by the muscle, it starts to synthesize fat, okay, fatty acids. So this is what we call liver de novo lipogenesis. So it begins to generate its own fat because it's got to use up all of that glucose that has been diverted to it. And then, of course, it also starts to make some more triglycerides as well from the glucose. So your triglyceride levels will begin to go up. And then, of course, your HDL levels will go down as well. So this is when trouble begins because the liver is now overwhelmed and is now doing what it knows how to do with the glucose that has been diverted to it. So the net result of all of that over time is that the liver has generated so much fat and it stores the fat within the substance of the liver. And this is what results in what we call fatty liver. So once you have fatty liver, what happens then is, the liver itself now becomes resistant to glucose as well. It stops taking up the glucose. So it now gets to the point where the liver is now saying no to the glucose, just like the muscles did. So in the end, once the liver and the muscles begin to say no to the glucose, that is what we call insulin resistance because the liver is resistant to the insulin core to take up the glucose. The muscles initially have said no to the glucose. They're not obeying instructions from the insulin. So once you have a combination of liver and the muscles saying no, that by definition is insulin resistance, which of course dovetails to diabetes. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how type 2 diabetes comes about. Okay, so now you understand the disease process, how diabetes actually comes about. The fact that everything starts in the skeletal muscle, where you lay down fat in the skeletal muscle, then of course with the fat in there, the skeletal muscle will reject the glucose that is in circulation, and then things move quickly onto the liver. The liver is going to receive all of the glucose, but over time, it's going to start generating its own fat, and then that results in fatty liver. And if you don't do anything about it, then what happens next is you develop insulin resistance, which then moves on quickly to pre-diabetes. And then from pre-diabetes, if you still don't do anything about your condition, that is how diabetes comes about, okay? So skeletal muscle, fatty liver, insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, and then of course diabetes. Now you can join all of the dots. Now that you understand the disease process, it will now make sense to you when I say you need to cut down on your fat consumption. This is what I mean, because you are not going to reverse your condition unless you take out all of the fat from the liver and the skeletal muscle. That is how you reverse type 2 diabetes. You have to get rid of the fat from the liver as well as fat from the muscle. When you do that, the liver and the muscle, they're going to be quite receptive to the glucose again. And that is how you become more insulin sensitive. That is the reverse of insulin resistance. I'm hoping that by watching this video, the disease process will make a lot more sense to you now, which means you make better decisions about your health. That's the whole idea behind this very video, because all videos don't have to be about solution. Sometimes it makes sense for you to understand the disease process, and once you understand the disease process, you make better decisions about your health. It also means that you take the instructions that I give to you a lot more seriously because you understand where I am coming from. Make sense? So I'm hoping that you got some value from this very video. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. Please like the video, and also please share this video with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues. If you've got any questions, any comments regarding the content of this video presentation, go ahead, leave your comments or questions down below. By the way, don't forget to go to askdrjoe.org. Over there, you can also ask questions and show your support for the channel. I think that's about it for this video. Until next time, well, this is Dr. Joe signing out.